Hey gang, welcome to the next demo of the Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives eRegs sprint demo for Sprint Jiggle. This is Will Sullivan, project manager for the team, and we're going to demonstrate the work that we did the last 2 weeks. First, we're going to jump to Carolyn, who is going to, oh geez, it's on autoplay. Sorry about that. Carolyn will discuss research, and I will toss it to Carolyn.
Hello. So we're going to go over some of the learnings we had from the user research we've done previously. So let me share my screen. Screen share. So you should be able to see a blue slide that says research. So we set out a couple weeks ago based on the priorities that we identified with ATF to learn a little bit more about how users wanted to look on both related documents and also print and PDF. So as a team, we identified some research questions that we wanted to find answers for. For related documents, we wanted to know what type of related documents was most important to users. We wanted to know what is the right amount of information of related documents to actually display in the right-hand column, what's going to feel complete to users and what's going to feel overwhelming. And we also wanted to know if users want to see rulings that have been superseded by newer ones and that were no longer active, or if they just wanted to know what's applicable right now and what do I need to worry about right now. So I'm going to go over some of our findings. Actually, before we get there, for print and PDF, we had a few questions. We wanted to know, when do users want to print both the whole CFR part, or when do they want to print just a few paragraphs and why? What are they trying to do with the print? And then also we wanted to understand just basic usability question, like how are they doing it right now? For the same thing for PDFs, we want to know when do they want to create PDFs? Are they creating PDFs of the whole CFR part or just little paragraphs? Why are they doing it? What are they using it for? And then again, how are they doing it now? Basic usability. So what we did is we conducted a number of interviews. We talked to some internal users and one external users. We took a lot of copious notes, and then we extracted observations, like individual observations or nuggets that we got out of those interviews, put them in a spreadsheet, and then started tagging them to categorize them. So this way, using the spreadsheet and the tags, I can take all the observations that relate to PDFs or all the observations that relate to printing, group them together, and then come up with an observation that sort of describes what that finding is. We're going to go over some high-level ones. I'm also going to be sending out a research report that goes into a little more depth, a little more detail, and also be putting that on the research wiki so that it's available for everyone to see. So getting into the findings a little bit. For related documents, we learned that people have two different desires, right? So they want to see the currently active rulings when they're out in the field or when they're talking to licensees. They don't want to overwhelm licensees with information that's not really relevant to them right now. But if they're trying to understand the ATF policy or come up with a position, they also want to see rulings that have been superseded because it helps them better understand the history of ATF's position. They also want to see previous versions of regulations and also other related documents. So one person mentioned that he keeps the regulation guidelines from previous versions on his desk. Forms was big. They really wanted to see forms related to the regulation, so it's just easier once you see that you need to use a certain form, you can just go and grab it. And internal users and legal scholars also want to look at the original statute because that helps them better understand the intent behind a regulation. Other mentions include Q&As, open letters, procedures, as well as contact information, which was a little bit of surprise. Contact information being where do people go if they have questions about this? So those were also considered to be useful. For print, one thing that we learned that was surprising is that internal users really only want to print an entire CFR part. So they want to print all of 478. And they aren't interested in printing out individual pages off of eRegs. One user even said it would be a real pain to have to print them off one at a time. And we think this is because when they do refer to small sections or small, just a few paragraphs of a regulation, it's usually in digital form so that they can either send a link to somebody or copy and paste the actual text into a letter and email. So a print copy isn't going to really help them very much on that. Sorry about that alert. Findings for print, they will use printed CFI parts and other documents to send to licensees or the public, or when they're analyzing to edit long passages. And this seems to be why they want the entire thing. In some cases, internal users already have a hard copy, but in a lot of cases for external users, they point them to GPO, where they can either spend $35 and get a copy, or tell them to download it from their website and take it to Kinko's. From the usability side, it's a little bit all over the map. Some users very innately know to use the browser's print function. Other people seem to add unnecessary steps, like I will copy it over into a Word document and print from there. And then other people they weren't able to figure out how to print at all. For PDF, the uses are slightly different. So they'll attach PDFs to emails, or even just to keep it handy for themselves for easy retrieval. Sometimes they'll create a PDF, and sometimes they'll actually just download what they consider the official PDF. So there's this sort of sense out there. There's one PDF that rules them all. Similar to print, some users are able to print a PDF, but a lot are not. For some reason, this was a little bit more difficult, perhaps because the create a PDF function is hidden under the print function, and some people aren't able to make that connection. So from this research, and from what we found out, we have a few recommendations. One is I'd really like to talk to a few more external users to learn about how their needs differ and how they use regulations differently. I think we can pretty safely deprioritize printing or creating a PDF of a single page off of eRegs, because nobody indicated that they had interest in doing that. However, we can explore ways of allowing them to get in a print or a PDF of the entire part. And then we identified some design opportunities for things that we can solve for. And I'm phrasing these as sort of how might we as questions, because that way it opens up the opportunity for multiple solutions. It's not prescribing a single approach. It's just saying, like, this is the question we need to solve. So how might we help regulations lawyers and legal scholars find rulings, both active and otherwise, and related documents, without getting in the way of licensees and field investigators who just want to know what's current? How might we help users easily find forms that are mentioned in regulations? How might we allow users, some of them who might be less technically savvy, to print or save a PDF of an entire regulation or regulation part? How might we help licensees who don't have a law degree understand regulations and rulings so that they can remain compliant? And how can we better support industry operations investigators while they are working in the field? So we've already started working on some of these, and I will pass it to Micah to discuss how we are approaching that.
So Carolyn's going to keep control of the slides while I talk, and she'll navigate over to the next slide, which is some of the design beginnings there. If you can't hear me, let me know. But the main place and the highest prioritized thing, as our team has been talking and as we researched, were the related documents in the right-hand sidebar. So currently there's rulings in this space. The first happy path towards moving towards related documents is to utilize that space. So a couple things that are going on here. We're following the same expected UI pattern of using what's called accordions. So as you can imagine accordion, it opens and closes, expands and contracts, and that's what currently happens within rulings in the sidebar. So we're just going to continue to utilize that certain pattern as we display. On the left-hand side, you can see the top hand left side, as if there were the case of no related documents. There's some discussion about whether we would even have that there at all, because if there's nothing there, why say it? But I think it is I think it's worthwhile. We believe it's worthwhile to show that there is nothing related, because more often than not, people that we talk to knew that things should have been related, or rulings that should have been there, or forms. And I think as we move forward, there's, the goal is more things are going to be there than not. So this is maybe more of a catch error more than anything else, even though it wouldn't be an error, but a catch state. Below that is what it would look like if it's populated and closed. So in this scenario, we have 7 related documents. And then moving to the right, you can see varying degrees of the ways which it's expanded, and various cases that would look like. Again, this is kind of happy path. These are only 7 related things, and it's a couple of things about the design in general is we're utilizing blue to minimize yellow, which is currently happening within the ruling section. Yellow is often associated or related with warnings, like something's, be prepared for this, or this might happen, or And so we wanted to kind of dial that back a little bit. We want to draw attention to it. So we're utilizing the blue palette throughout to have an emphasis there without making it feel off-putting or that something is wrong. We're utilizing what's called chevrons. So you can see the little V-looking shapes. Those are called chevrons. Currently, there's plus and minus shapes on the rulings, and that is more associated with adding things and removing things, and that's not an action that actually happens here. So we wanted to be a little more clear that we're utilizing an opening and closing of things. We're also using less bold. There's a lot of bold currently that's happening in that space. We wanted to use less bold and emphasize dynamic items with bold. So in this case, you can see like 7 related items. 7 is bold, 3 rulings, 1 form, where you wanted to deprioritize everything, or in many cases, things were bold, like related documents, or all caps. So we wanted to kind of give a little more contrast availability to us. And then we're also speaking of that, we're also updating the contrast, not only with the colors, but also helped with some accessibility concerns. So in this example, you see where it says the rulings help to interpret this section. Currently, that doesn't pass accessibility elements, so we're updating that. Elements is not the word I'm looking for. Accessibility inventories of those things. When we look through things to make sure they're accessible for all people, then that is something that was flagged as we were looking at this section. So those are some design updates, and that is all that I have to say about that. So Carolyn, I think we're actually going over to CM for development updates.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So I will cover some of the engineering side of the work that we've done this past sprint and a little bit earlier. I'm going to share my screen. All right. So the first thing that we wanted to work on as engineers and developers was to update our software stacks. We have been, over the past year and a half-ish, maintaining all security updates, but that's not quite enough for long-term stability. And so we wanted to go through the software libraries themselves and update everything. As an example of that, I wanted to point out Django, which is our web framework. When we first started working on ATF, it was 2015. At that point in time, the most modern version of Django was 1.8. And so that's what we chose to start with. Unfortunately, now it is 2017, getting close to the end of 1.8's lifetime. So the light green here, long-term support, means that there are security patches and similar essential fixes that are being published by upstream, by Django. So the most important thing that we worked on was switching our support to 1.11. And so we implemented this. It wasn't a huge lift, but it did require lots of small changes. And this should keep us supported through 2020. Similarly, we updated Python. We were in the 2 branch, now we're in the 3 branch. This is also for long-term support and will help in terms of efficiency of the software we write. It'll run slightly faster. Additionally, we had about 24 additional libraries that were updated, but they're lesser. We also added a Docker-based development environment, which means that to get started working on this source code, it's much faster than it has been in the previous cycles. So this should allow ATF and 18F and the general public and whoever wants to contribute code to get up and running relatively quickly. They need to have Docker installed, which works on Windows, Linux, Mac, basically everywhere. And then there's a single command to get started. I also wanted to talk about some of the changes around pulling data, specifically around that additional resources that Micah was mentioning before. The approach that we've tended to take in the parser, in eRegs, is to run our parser and to kick it off with a specific command. To say, hey parser, I want you to parse a specific CFR part, in this case 555. It would then go off to eCipher, to the annual editions of the CFR, to the Federal Register, etc., and retrieve document data. So retrieve information about the regulations themselves. It would use that to build versions of the regulation as it's changed over time. We then wanted to add additional information on top of it. So for example, for the ruling information, which we have right now on the right-hand side, we would go to atf.gov and retrieve ruling information, which we would then associate with specific parts of specific sections of regulations. So we would kind of annotate the regulations with this extra data. Finally, after doing all of that, including annotations for definitions and citations and things of that sort, we would take that big package and send it over to regulations.atf.gov. So this meant that the parsing process, the building up of data, was separate from regulations.atf.gov. That works pretty well, but it has some problems. Notably, it's pretty slow. It takes roughly an hour to parse all of the 27th part of CFR, so all of the ATF regs. It's also a human-driven process. We want to make sure that there is a person involved just to fact-check everything, to make sure that there's not a new version that we weren't expecting, that sort of thing. And so historically, we've run these parsing processes only when the CFR changes or when it's about to change. That's not going to fly too well for what we're looking at for the additional documents, the rulings, etc., because we want to allow ATF to update information in their content management system in Django, and for that to appear on eRegs relatively quickly. So if we needed a person to start the process and then wait a few hours for everything to be updated each time, it would just be too long. So the new approach is to have regulations.atf.gov talk to atf.gov directly. So to get those rulings, those additional documents, the open letters, etc., and to keep it all in that house, if that makes sense. So the parser isn't involved here because the parser would be slower and would require manual intervention. This process, where we're completely depending on atf.gov and trusting the data from there, means that we can automate the process. So this is a graph showing our logs on the demo site for ATF eRegs. And you can see that these are the logs that are just for retrieving the additional resources, so rulings, open letters, etc. And if you look at the graph, you see that it runs about once an hour. And so this is the strategy we have right now, is that we will synchronize our data with atf.gov about once an hour for these additional resources. We can slow that down, speed it up as needed, but this is where we'll start. And with that, I think I'll hand it back to Will.
Okie dokie. Now we're going to jump to the fun part. Well, not, this is all fun, but the interactive part, I guess, the call-in. Our next demo will be on Friday, August 18th in 2 weeks, where we will show more of our fantastic work and research. So this is how you call in to the conference line. You can go ahead and close this YouTube stream. I'll keep this screen up for a little bit longer so you can dial in. But just call into this conference number, or this one if you need to make it toll-free, and enter this code, and we'll be to talk about the work that has been done, to solicit feedback and ideas for how to continue to improve the product, and what we should tackle the next 2 weeks in our next sprint. So I'll keep this slide up for a little longer. Go ahead and close this YouTube channel after you've dialed in. Here's the number. We'll talk to you soon.